Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Grayzone. Sorry to keep you all waiting for so long. I was still setting up the show, and there were new stories coming in that we wanted to make sure we had in our notes. So, yeah, apologies for that. Was it a busy week? I mean, I guess so, but there's always, it's getting busier and busier. I wanted to prepare a segment about the ICC basically being destroyed before our eyes by every country controlled by Israel, including, I guess, the one I live in. So that held me up. Anyway, welcome back, Aaron. It's been a couple weeks.
Well, welcome back to you. I mean, you were in Iran, and for people who haven't seen it, you did a great report back at Busboys and Poets the other night in D.C., where I understand you were accosted by some Iranians who weren't happy that you were documenting the aggression against their country and the massacres of their own people. Like, I guess they support those things for whatever reason. But yeah, if people haven't seen that, they should check it out.
Yeah, I mean, that was not prepared. I went and parked. A friend who was inside said, yeah, there's some monarchists protesting you outside. And then I came around the corner and there was like a couple, maybe more, but I saw a couple monarchists with a huge sign, 40,000 killed by Iran, with the fake death toll of the January protests / riots. And they were, at the door, basically at the entrance to mess with me. And they, normally under normal circumstances, I would have probably just ignored them. But I'd just been in Iran for a week, and I was going in and out of the rubble of what were once people's homes or a hospital or even a synagogue that had been blown up, which these people were cheering it on. I mean, the day after the Minab massacre, these monarchists were marching through the streets of Georgetown, dancing and partying and celebrating. And this was what they wanted. And I remember seeing a house that had been, not a house, a whole apartment block, Gaza style, with families living on top of one another, that had been blown up by US bombs. And I found some children's clothes in it that were like, the children were like the age of it looked like my kids' clothes. And that was really poignant. So it was like, I just kind of snapped when I saw them still out there, still daring to show their faces in public after all of what they did. I mean, you barely even see the clown prince, Reza Pahlavi, anymore. He was begging for the U.S. to bomb, and they should be ashamed, but they weren't. So I kind of just said, like, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, you guys celebrated after Minab. It was actually the day that the parents in Minab were burying their kids that this happened. And so they said, actually, that was a military base. Who put the military base there? And started justifying the Minab massacre. So then, it escalated from there with me telling them just how I really felt, that they're the biggest sellouts I've ever seen. Like, they're worse than Miami Cubans. And I don't know, something a lot of people might have missed was there was like this jogger, like local yuppie in booty shorts, who intervened on their behalf and started screaming at me. Mm-hmm. So I just had some choice words for him. And then I went in and did my talk, which you can see on our YouTube channel at the Grayzone. And I think it was a great talk, especially not because of what I said, but because of the Q&A session. So many Iranian Americans from DC showed up, and, these were not necessarily the typical Islamic Republic supporters. Many of them were secular, but they are horrified by the war. They're organizing against it. And they're organizing in defense of Iran's sovereignty. So you can hear from them. I think it was, we had some great exchanges, but it really informed crowd, because for many of them, it's the country they came from. And I know you have an even more important announcement, which we've been waiting for a long time. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, my new book on the Ukraine proxy war, Their Blood, Our Bullets, there it is. the hidden story of the proxy war. I'm still working on the subtitle, so that's actually going to change. But you can see it there. It's called "Their Blood, Our Bullets: The Hidden Story of the U.S.-Russia War for Ukraine." It's available for pre-order now. I've working on it for a very long time. A lot of people have been very patient with me as I've put it together, and I'm grateful to everyone, especially Or Books, who's publishing this, for their patience and their support. And yeah, it comes out in the fall, the late fall, and it's available for pre-order now. And there's a link to it in the show notes for this episode.
Well, congratulations on that. I like the cover. It's the hidden story of the U.S.-Russian war for Ukraine. So what's your elevator pitch?
I got to work on that. But basically, the story we've been told is that this was a fight in defense of democracy and territorial integrity. And it's the opposite. The U.S. has exploited Ukraine and its internal divisions to bleed Russia. And in the process, the U.S. has undermined its own democracy by criminalizing dissent, by enlisting progressives in support for Cold War dogma and a neoconservative agenda. And it's been a disaster foremost for Ukraine, but for the whole world. And the book tracks that from the broken promises about NATO expansion, NATO expanding to Russia's borders, U.S. sabotaging arms control treaties, ignoring Russia's security concerns, backing a coup in Ukraine, encouraging the ensuing civil war, blocking so many peaceful alternatives that could have prevented all of this, and then keeping the war going by blocking another peace deal that was brokered early in the war. So essentially about how the U.S. has used Ukraine to bleed Russia. And it's called Their Blood, Our Bullets because Oliver North, the Iran-Contra figure, bragged in talking about Ukraine that it reminded him of what Reagan did in the 80s in supporting the death squads in Central America, in supporting the Mujahideen. He said, just like those people, the Ukrainians are willing to use their blood and our bullets. And he talked about what a great thing this was. So that's why it's called Their Blood, Our Bullets.
That's how this war has gone on for so long is, I guess Slavic lives don't matter in the West. How many have been killed? Hundreds of thousands. I mean, certainly hundreds of thousands wounded. The global economy is suffering enormously. And as Ukraine's drone swarms hit Russian oil infrastructure, oil depots, Western media is celebrating. This is like the good war. This is the liberal war. This is the Democratic Party's war. That's why I think this book is so important, because the lies haven't been punctured. The lies haven't been exploded the same way the lies of, Israel's occupation of Palestine or the Israeli-directed war on Iran have been exploded in broad daylight for so many people who are paying attention. This war, just for so many, including, highly educated people in the U.S., it just seems like it was just a Russian invasion for Putin to reinstitute Russia's strategic peripheral depth and start to bring the Soviet Union back to life. That's really what it's about. It's about Putin's aggression. But there's a deeper story there. And this is a book I think you can kind of, once you really dig into this book and your footnotes, I know how you operate, and you've been pumping out these Substack posts, which have kind of chronicled the war and the lies that have kept the war going. Having this book at your fingertips is kind of like a compendium of corrections to lies. And it's what we need to actually stop this war.
Lindsey Graham recently passed away. And, there was, of course, all this critique of his warmongering legacy, especially in the Middle East. He was a bloodthirsty warmonger. But yet, if you look at Ukraine, every single progressive Democrat in Congress has voted in lockstep with Lindsey Graham. And
Richard Blumenthal was like always on stage with him. To me.
Yeah. But not even, but I mean, like Richard Blumenthal, sure, like center, but like even progressives. If you look at Bernie Sanders, how does his voting record differ from Lindsey Graham's when it comes to supporting the Ukraine proxy war? Eventually, Bernie voted against one war funding bill because Biden lumped funding for the Ukraine proxy war and funding for Israel's genocide together. So Bernie was forced to finally vote against it, but he didn't want to. Bernie even said, if the Ukraine funding was separate, I would have voted for that. So Bernie Sanders has a virtually identical voting record with Lindsey Graham in recent years when it comes to funding the Ukraine proxy war. And when Bernie Sanders, the top progressive, is voting in lockstep with the top neocon, Lindsey Graham, I think it's worthy of some reflection. And there hasn't been that at all on the progressive side. And that's the side I care most about, because that's how I still identify. And so that's what I hope this book will help contribute to.
I'm just going back and back into the archives. I mean, I'm going back to April 30th, 2022. The entire squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar and company, voted along with Ro Khanna and every Democrat in the House in favor of the massive Lend-Lease arms shipment to Ukraine, which is designed to escalate the war. And the only ones who voted against it were Republicans. So again, I mean, that really highlights why this book is important. And now Trump has sort of taken on the war. It doesn't look like Trump has any interest in ending this war at this point.
The only thing Trump has done differently is he's not going to Congress to ask for more money. But one of the reasons why he's not doing that is because right before he took office in April 2024, so, like a few months before the election, Biden, with Republican support, including Trump's blessing, passed another $61 billion in Ukraine proxy war funding that basically keeps the war going indefinitely. And it was designed to avoid any disruption by Trump. So it basically locks in proxy war funding, whatever Trump wants to do. And so Trump hasn't had to go back to ask for more money because there is so much. And also, he's forced NATO to spend more money. And that's another aspect of this. All the fear mongering about Trump pulling out of NATO and all the Russiagate fraud that, Trump was a Russian agent. Meanwhile, what Trump was doing was badgering NATO to spend even more money on the military-industrial complex, to raise NATO military spending for every country to 5% GDP. And the only state that didn't go along with that is Spain, which, Trump has been attacking. So while Democrats, and the book talks about this too, are obsessing about this fiction of Trump being a Russian asset, Trump was actually getting NATO to spend more money on the military-industrial complex. And that's another outgrowth of this Ukraine proxy war, is, supporting militarism and taking money away from social spending. So again, another thing that in a different era, progressives would be concerned about, but now they're all in lockstep behind.
And scrapping the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, for example. What was the other one? The
Open Skies Treaty. Before that, it was the ABM Treaty under Bush. But yeah, that's Trump, Open Skies, INF, and New START. Because New START, the last treaty limiting the nuclear weapon stockpiles of both countries, that expired in February. And Russia offered like an informal 1-year freeze, which is the most basically that could be done. And Trump rejected that. So right now, officially, there are no more constraints on the nuclear weapon stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia. And everyone just yawned because of years of brainwashing, like coming from Russiagate and Ukraine proxy war, that it was good to have a confrontation with Russia.
Yeah, we're getting some comments. One commenter said they're reading Benoit Pare's book on the Ukraine conflict, one of the few critical books on this. I think, did you interview him?
I did, yes. So Benoit Pare is a former monitor with the OSCE, which was on the ground in the years after the Maidan coup of 2014, monitoring the civil war that the U.S. helped start by backing the coup in 2014. And we did interview him last summer about his experience.
Yeah,
and
I think you were one of the first in this kind of in this sphere to interview him. We also have a commenter comparing your book to Stephen F. Cohen's War with Russia and calling it kind of a continuation. And I know Stephen was kind of a mentor to you, so that's a great comment. And I do think this book is a tribute to Stephen F. Cohen's work, because he went out swinging.
He did, and he was vilified for it, and he was isolated, and progressive shows that used to have him on as a featured expert shunned him in the last years of his life. And that's because of the Russiagate mania. And so, yes, I'm absolutely trying to continue on in the tradition that Stephen F. Cohen carried forward. Absolutely.
Well, should we continue on Ukraine, since we started with Ukraine? We do have a Ukraine section. I want to talk about Iran and the escalating war, which is possibly moving into its most dangerous phase. But I mean, do you want to?
Yeah, well, Lindsey Graham recently passed away, who was a stalwart champion of the Ukraine proxy war. He was the guy who bragged 4 years ago this month, is when he offered an infamous statement that as long as we keep supporting Ukraine, they'll fight to the last person.
Yeah.
And he thought that was a good thing. So he recently passed away, but Ukraine has found, I think, a suitable replacement for Lindsey Graham when it comes to MAGA support, prominent support, and that is Laura Loomer, who has just touched down in Ukraine to offer her support for the Ukrainian government after years of being a supposed critic.
Yeah. Do we have her on screen? We do not. Here's Loomer and Zelensky. An excerpt. Well, let me just preface it. I actually let me just preface this. Laura Loomer spent the week before going to Ukraine attacking me, like heavily focused on me, which I suspect is part of her contract with the Israeli government, and that she was getting fed notes and talking points by not just Israeli lobbyists, but by Israeli officials. Because I've seen the way these talking points get passed around to people who have no idea what the hell they're talking about, and how they just read a script and they all echo each other. And all of it has to do with me being sort of like responsible for Joe Kent, and like I somehow employed Joe Kent's wife, and it always starts from there. And she started with that when I went to Iran. And she starts declaring that the Treasury Secretary should launch an investigation. Scott Bessent should investigate me and see if the IRGC was paying me, and blah, blah, blah. I wasn't paid a single toman or cent to be there. I paid for my travel. Like, I don't do that. She does. And now we can clearly see it. Julia Ioffe just asked her, who paid for your trip? Was it the Ukrainian government? And she said, no, I have donors. Anatoly Shari, who is an exiled former Ukrainian opposition lawmaker who would be killed if he went back to Ukraine under Zelensky because it's such an undemocratic place, claimed that Loomer received as much as $2 million for this trip. And she has reversed all of her positions on Russia. She was a contributor to RT. She said Ukraine correctly was supporting entire regiments of neo-Nazis who sig heil and have Nazi tattoos and worship anti-Semitic Nazi figures like Roman Shukevich and Stepan Bandera. And now she's totally reversed it and says, oh no, I was just duped by Russian propaganda. And that's really, she's just waking up. She's having an awakening. And, so, instead of kind of being allowed to just see Ukraine or make it look like she's just seeing Ukraine, Zelensky just adopts her and makes sure that Laura Loomer is elevated to, a higher level than who's visited him before in the past. Like a lot of B and even A-list Hollywood people have come and visited him, and they would just get like quick meetings where they'd shake his hand, like Ben Stiller.
Yep, Ben Stiller.
Orlando Bloom, like who else?
Sean Penn, of course.
Sean Penn, really was into it. Was like a real groupie. But Loomer gets like an interview in the middle of the presidential palace, and they really emphasize how much this is a state-sponsored, important propaganda trip. It comes on the heels of Candace Owens going to Russia, and Anatoly Shari's theory was that Ukraine saw Candace Owens, one of the most popular political podcasters, go to Russia, and they said, we need to get someone who's popular from the other side, who's just, and of course, Loomer, you just like lay down the cash on the dresser, and she's going to work for you. You're a client. So that's what happened. But I've never met a Laura Loomer fan. Like if you talk to politically engaged suburban moms who are kind of pilled, you're going to meet some Candace Owens fans. Laura Loomer's not like a real organic phenomenon. The only reason that she's valuable to them is because she's supposedly close to Trump. So we've been hearing for weeks, Aaron, that Ukraine is winning again or could be winning. Like the Atlantic Council has a paper about how Ukraine is winning. because of its drones. There are all kinds of rifts emerging. In reality, they're not winning, and they're suffering on the battlefield, but it seems like they're winning to many people. And this is kind of the message that, those who want this war to continue are sending. But I really think if you're winning and you're confident and you suddenly have a new, just a new swagger in your step, you would not bring Laura Loomer to the presidential palace and pay whatever you paid. That's not a show of confidence to me. That's a show of desperation and concern about keeping Trump on their side. Here's an excerpt.
Ukraine that showed that only 17%. I saw that there was some internal polling from Ukraine that showed that only 17% of Ukrainian people have a favorable view of the United States, which I'm confused it's not higher because we send them so much aid in defense against Russia. And also the opinion towards Ukraine and the United States is not very favorable. And so I just wanted to share with you, as somebody who was anti-Ukraine and who did consume a lot of Russian propaganda. I used to write articles for RT. I wrote about 5 articles for RT, and I regret doing so. And I've come to realize that I was bamboozled by Russian propaganda, and I came to believe a lot of untrue things about Ukraine. I used to think that this was a country full of Nazis. I'm just trying to convey to you how sometimes optics, if things are not done in a very precise manner, how it can be conveyed and how much damage can be done to your country's image. Because the Democrats, I think they really exploited your visit. I want to ask
but can I tell you honestly? Yes, honestly. Sorry. Yes. For the things what I will tell. I think if I knew or if I really could be involved to elections, maybe Democrats could have a little bit better result.
Well, we don't want that. We don't want that.
I mean, first of all, the fact that he has to interrupt her and say, hey, Laura, can I say something? I'm the president of Ukraine. Do you mind if I talk in between your monologue? That's a little awkward. But also, I don't know what he's referring to there. By the way, he did get involved in the last election. This was one of the reasons why Trump hated him, is because he toured with Democrats to a weapons factory in Pennsylvania, and him and Josh Shapiro signed some bombs together, just as people like Mike Pence and Nikki Haley did to bombs in Gaza. So he actually did get involved, and that's one of the reasons why Trump was fresh with him when he came to the White House. So I don't know what he's and Ukrainians have gotten involved too. In 2016, they also helped Hillary Clinton's campaign, and that backfired on them as well. And there's for people watching, there's Josh Shapiro and some Democrats and Zelensky signing some bombs to go drop on ethnic Russians in the Donbass.
Josh Shapiro wishes they were going to Gaza to drop on demographic threats, but this was the PR. This was the photo op he got. There's Zelensky and Ukraine's ambassador. Yeah. You can see her interview skills are really top level. She's very charismatic. And there are no Nazis in Ukraine. That's why Zelensky's sitting across from a woman who just recently celebrated the mass shooting, a lethal mass shooting at a mosque in the United States. He's sitting across from a Nazi. She's just a Judeo-Nazi. Mm-hmm. He's sitting across from a woman who called for the U.S. military to massacre millions of Muslims, including and as well as journalists and, including myself, who happened to be in Tehran during the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. I mean, that's a pretty Nazi-esque call. I know Mark Levin also made the same call. This is someone who's lusted for genocide in Gaza, who celebrates the flattening of Gaza. There are no Nazis here. This is a great way of refuting that.
Yeah, and she's sitting across from a Ukrainian president who just, keeping to recent events.
Yeah.
The influence of ultra-nationalists, including people who worship neo-Nazis, is so strong that Zelensky recently gave a state reburial to a Nazi ally, Andrei Melnik, who was a leader of the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who collaborated with the Nazi occupation and was involved in the massacre of Poles and Jews. And Zelensky's under such pressure from the ultranationalists, neo-Nazis, that he gave Melnik a state reburial. and also renamed a Ukrainian Special Forces unit after the UPA, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, which also was complicit in the massacre of over 100,000 Polish people. And what makes this all the more striking is that, Ukraine is an ally of Poland, but the influence of the neo-Nazis right now is so strong that Zelensky felt that it was in his interest to risk alienating Poland, which he did. Poland protested this move because Zelensky's celebrating forces that massacred tens of thousands of Polish people. But he felt compelled, for whatever politically, that he had to do this. And so Poland has protested this, and they even withdrew a civilian honor that they gave to Zelensky. So that's actually how influential neo-Nazis still are inside Ukraine. And again, it's not a question of how numerically large they are. They're not a large number of people. So it's not filled with Nazis. But the point is, they have, because of their muscle and their violent intimidation tactics, they have huge influence to the point where Zelensky felt like he had no choice but to alienate a key ally to honor a neo-Nazi.
Yeah. I mean, here's President Nawrocki of Poland accusing Zelensky of, he said, Zelensky has demonstrated that Ukraine, in terms of the mentality of glorifying bandits and murderers from the Ukrainian insurgent army, is not ready to be part of the European family. Pretty harsh words. There's no place in the European family for bandits and murderers who killed women and children, who murdered Poles. Such bandits cannot be glorified, and the UPA cannot be glorified. Even Anne Applebaum's husband, Radoslaw Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, condemned this.
Wow. I didn't know
that. He has to. I mean, he just has to. So maybe he had to sleep on the couch that night for condemning Ukrainian Nazis.
And again, these are people who have threatened to kill him going back many years. You can go year by year, you can find an influential militia leader in Ukraine threatening to kill Zelensky if he makes peace with Russia, essentially, before Russia invaded and afterwards too. So yeah, of course now he's going to say, oh yeah, we don't have Nazis here, except for the ones who have threatened to kill me every single year, except the ones who are now forcing me to honor Nazi war criminals and rename military units after them.
So the Loomer visit was intended to sort of galvanize MAGA support for Ukraine. And MAGA doesn't exist as an organic grassroots movement anymore. It's basically Trump, who shared the interview, and everyone who's basically paid to support Trump or has some kind of skin in the game or is involved with Israel in some way. That's basically what MAGA is. Or a contingent of over 50 or more boomer-esque Fox News watchers who are transfixed by corporate state media. That's pretty much it. That was her job. And then, she's going to attack the woke Reich of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and on behalf of Ukraine. It really feels like the battle lines are drawn. The battle lines are clear now. And everyone who supports Trump would be supporting Dick Cheney and George W. Bush in 2006. It's like, Rich Lowry and the National Review and the American Enterprise Institute and the neocons rebranded with red caps. That's it. Maybe they're a little bit more anti-immigrant than Bush was, but that's it. I mean, there's no difference now. Tucker is totally done with this fake movement. The con is revealed, and JD Vance is also their target, and he's claiming that there is an op to destroy his presidential ambitions. They're getting behind Marco Rubio or someone like Rubio, and that's what we have to look forward to. Is another term of another second Bush term if the Republicans win, and Josh Shapiro vying for the Democratic nomination. The Democrats are many top Democrats or liberals are celebrating Laura Loomer's visit. Remember, this is someone who recently celebrated a mass shooting at a mosque in the United States, who is one of the most prominent racist commentators in the US. And liberals are just saying, oh, well, she had a change of heart. It's just, she saw the light finally. And we can't really blame Zelensky for bringing her there. This is David Axelrod. This was Barack Obama's campaign manager. This is the guy who basically made Barack Obama from a wooden graduate student and author into a seemingly charismatic president who duped zillions of Americans.
When you see her sitting with Zelensky, part of the reason your jaw is on the floor, it's not just because she...
By the way, I mean, remember Aaron Burnett's visit to Kiev in 2023? It kind of presaged the Loomer visit. I mean, she was just drooling over Zelensky. Anyway, here it is.
She had these opinions about Ukraine, which were based on propaganda and a lack of any kind of experience there, but were because she has said other things. I mean, she said, if Kamala Harris wins, the White House will smell like curry. And White House speeches will be facilitated via a call center. Yeah. She said, can't even watch a Super Bowl anymore because immigrants have literally ruined everything. And there's a lot more where that came from, right? So the image of her sitting across from Ukrainian President Zelensky in that context is incredibly powerful.
It is. And
but why powerful?
All I could think of is, my goodness, the things one has to do to save their country. And I think he decided this is something he had to do to save his country because, they call her an influencer, but the person she influences that he cares about is Donald Trump. And if this is what it takes, then this is what he's going to do.
When you see her sitting with Zelensky.
I mean, it's, first of all, the things he has to do to save his country, he's presiding over the destruction of his country. What he's trying to do is save his political career and the grift he has going. Even right now in Lviv, which is a stronghold of Ukrainian ultranationalism, you have massive protests against these press gangs, these military officials who go around kidnapping young men to send them off to die. And of course, these are working class young men who get kidnapped. People with elite connections don't get sent off to war. And so even in Lviv, a stronghold of Ukrainian ultranationalism, I think the only area that Zelensky actually didn't win in 2019, because in 2019 when he ran for office, he was running on a peace mandate. So even in Lviv, you have these protests, and recently there was one where they tipped over a military van holding some people who were kidnapped to go off to fight, and this has been happening all across the country. So this idea that like Zelensky, in meeting with Laura Loomer, is trying to save his country when really he's just presiding over its destruction. But again, if you're a liberal, this is the program you've been enlisted in, believing that sacrificing young Ukrainians is equal to saving the country.
Yeah. Well, I'll get to it in a second. Just, I wanted to reinforce your point, but here's another top liberal commentator, Nicholas Kristof, leading liberal humanitarian interventionist, columnist at the New York Times, someone who's taken a more critical view of Israel in recent months. But now he says, I disagree with Laura Loomer on 1,000 things. Like, oh, we're just having a principled disagreement on whether Muslims are people. But I admire her willingness to rethink Ukraine and go there. One of the things we pundits aren't good at is admitting when we're wrong, let alone seeking out information that contradicts our priors. She has the courage to do just that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, by the way, one thing Nicholas Kristof won't do is admit he's wrong in propagating the Hamas rape hoax, even as he did, by the way, important reporting on Israel's actual sexual violence. He still hasn't admitted that he was wrong to promote the Hamas rape hoax, which was used to wage the very genocide that he claims to oppose. But anyway, yeah, of course, I'm sorry. Like, on what planet does like an open bigot like Laura Loomer deserve any credit, especially when what she's being credited for here is like coming around to believing that Ukraine should be sacrificed in order to bleed Russia. That's essentially what Nicholas Kristof wants to applaud Laura Loomer for.
She's running a business, and anyone who pays her gets her services. And basically what she does is she smears, defames, attacks, dehumanizes anyone who's in the way of the objectives of the malign force that's paying her. That's what's going on here. So she's going to now be an attack dog. And Loomer, like, you're going to get Loomered if you are, getting in Ukraine's way, which is funny because, well, she wasn't on the major Mirotvoret's Ukraine kill list. She was actually on other kill lists that I was on. just a year ago.
Huh.
It's pretty clear what's going on. I mean, she attacked the judge who was sentencing this Medicare fraudster, Joseph Schwartz, as an anti-Semite for prosecuting him, like one of the biggest fraudsters in history, who Trump, of course, pardoned because like Chabad and Loomer. But, why was she attacking that judge? Why did she take an interest in that? According to ProPublica, she was working alongside Schwartz's own lobbyists. So that, like, how can Nicholas Kristof claim this is some principled person? It just shows that it doesn't just show like the degradation of the Trump administration or Ukraine or the right wing. It also shows how degraded and desperate liberals are to continue to sell this war, that they're portraying someone like her as even capable of courage when it's just pure political prostitution.
Like in the past, I've never paid attention to her, but like she's claiming now she underwent some sort of conversion. So which means before she was.
I never paid attention to her either, but it's like suddenly you have like a predator outside your window who's like scraping at the window.
No, I get it. Yeah. No.
So I have to pay attention because I'm a target.
Of course. My point is, before, when she was saying things that were supposedly critical of the Ukraine proxy war, would I ever for a second be like, yeah, well, I disagree with Laura Loomer on like whether or not Muslims are human beings, but I'm glad that she can see that NATO is using you. No, of course not. Like when someone is an open bigot, you don't give them credit for anything. They should be shunned, and their motives should never be taken at face value. But apparently liberals can't comprehend that.
Again, it's not just the bigotry, it's the mercenary quality of it all, which is just so obvious. It's so clear. Yeah. That's all it is. And that's also what MAGA is. They're all just a bunch of mercenaries, like a Cat Turd or Captive Dreamer, or any of those accounts that are boosting everything Trump does. They're all on the payroll. Like, it's not like they're just organically doing it because this is something they deeply believe in.
Well, yeah, and we're going to talk more about this, but look at Russiagate. Like, Russiagate was a total neo-McCarthyite scam. But look what the Trump administration is doing now. They just put out that report basically saying that Cuba, like they're basically casting Cuba in the role that liberals cast Russia for back after 2016, which is Cuba controls everything. Cuba's behind Black Lives Matter. Yeah. Cuba's behind every single people's movement. Cuba's pulling the strings of all these progressive figures, and they're all doing the exact same thing. You think maybe after being like framed as Russian assets, they'd learn a lesson, maybe apply some consistent principle, but no, it's just actually they're taking the same playbook, and actually it's way worse than Russiagate.
Let's just briefly cover that, and then we'll get into Iran since you brought it up. This is the State Department's video preview of this insane report, Cuba, the capital of communism, which asserts that Cuban communist operatives have infiltrated the U.S. government at the highest level.
A stunning new report out from the State Department. It details a decades-long Cuban influence campaign right here in the U.S.
So the State Department report is titled Cuba, the capital of 21st century communism.
The State Department, today they published a bombshell report.
Virtually every left-wing, radical, violent terrorist group in the Western Hemisphere has at some point relied on support from Cuba. And we have 90 miles from our shores, a failed state that also happens to be friendly territory for some of our adversaries. Cuba continues to host a pretty substantial collection of intelligence sites on behalf of the Chinese and the Russians. We've had successive American presidents say that the Western Hemisphere is going to be a priority, and they never do it. And the president has made it a personal priority.
We've known a lot about this, but the fact that it's inside this official report from Secretary of State Marco Rubio is really important.
So, you can get a sense of what this is about from that, which is that really highlights. If you read the report, it might become a little bit unclear, but that preview really highlights what this is about, which is justifying a military invasion of Cuba. That's what this is about. And then if you read the report, which I actually did, it's clearly written by AI, and whoever their human participants were operating in my view, under the guidance of Stephen Miller, but on behalf of Marco Rubio, the guru, the godfather right now of the Gusano industrial complex, because he controls the NSC and the State Department, and therefore is enacting the decades-long agenda of the South Florida Miami Mafia, which is to destroy Cuba's government and take it over for the Fajardo and Bacardi families, and take the land and turn it into like a, just completely privatize everything. But the report is 80% of it focuses on the 1960s and early 70s. And it looks like Stephen Miller's underlings just fed the entire the entire catalog of David Horowitz front page mag and Discover the Network's articles into like Claude AI, and it pumped out this hysterical pamphlet. It's basically a long David Horowitz pamphlet about how radicals in the 60s and 70s still threaten and haunt us today. And it even includes, Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn meeting with Barack Obama in their living room. Obama's involved. There's a picture of Karen Bass, the outgoing mayor of LA, with the Venceremos Brigade in 1972. So the mayor of LA is involved in this conspiracy as well. So is V, aka Eve Ensler, the author of the Vagina Monologues, because she went to the wedding of Jody Evans, who is a Code Pink co-founder, and Code Pink has gotten money from Roy Singham, who is, under investigation by the U.S. Singham has sponsored the People's Forum, this kind of like event space NGO in Midtown New York. And so the People's Forum has been subpoenaed by the House Ways and Means Committee. And, so they're drawing all of these connections into some kind of McCarthyite investigation. And Rubio actually declares, and this booklet actually declares, that McCarthy is an inspiration for what they aim to do, and that this is an actual blacklist, and that they do aim to neutralize communism or socialism in the United States to the point where they're targeting the DSA, which is basically a wing of the Democratic Party. And Zoran Mamdani is, of course, named and targeted in this, as is Hassan Piker, who they would like to seek to investigate because he went on this Cuba tour, or like Cuba Solidarity delegation. And so pretty much everyone is involved. They want to target the entire left and neutralize the left. But that is a secondary or even tertiary objective. The real objective is to justify military intervention in Cuba. They need there to be some threat. Rubio has declared it a failed state. Why is it failing? Because oil is totally blockaded and their electricity grid has collapsed. There's no way for them to power the island. People are suffering a humanitarian crisis brought onto it by the United States. Somehow it's still a threat. And so it needs to be invaded. The problem is Cuba is still held on despite this siege, and they're waiting too long. Midterms are coming up. Maybe Trump won't win. Maybe Rubio won't win, and they'll miss their opportunity. So this is it. And I think there's a very real chance of a military invasion of Cuba based on this deranged, recycled David Horowitz screed report pumped out under the watch of Horowitz's understudy, Stephen Miller and Marco Rubio.
Think about this recent run of secretaries of state: Mike Pompeo, and then Antony Blinken, and then Marco Rubio. It's just been an absolute nightmare. None of them interested in diplomacy. All of them interested in using their office to make life miserable for people around the world. And in Marco Rubio's case, being Cuban for, his own country of origin, because he wants to restore the days of Batista when gangsters and American profiteers ran Cuba. And the report also talks about the Cuban role around the world in a negative way, and mentions Cuba's intervention in Africa.
How dare they fight apartheid?
In places like Angola, where Cuba's intervention there was actually very helpful toward defeating apartheid South Africa, as Nelson Mandela openly gave Cuba credit for. And this report openly is just casting apartheid essentially as a good thing, and also dismisses Black Lives Matter as a foreign plot, and like the George Floyd protest, it's all Cuban, and
what the liberals portrayed it, or the Democrats portrayed that as a Russian plot.
That was a Russian plot under the Democrats, and now that it's Republicans, now it's a Cuban plot, and both plots are used to foment war. But in the case of Cuba, it's far more sinister because Cuba is very vulnerable just off the coast of the U.S., and that's why the U.S. can do things like collapse its power grid. At least, I mean, the cost to Russia have been huge, and it led to a war in Ukraine, which has been massive. But at least Russia can defend itself. Cuba has been subjected to this criminal blockade going back decades, and it's average people who are suffering the most.
Well, I think they will suffer more following a U.S. military invasion. And that's not to deny there are people on the island who want relief badly. And there are some young people there who run around waving U.S. flags in central Havana and demand a U.S. military invasion.
Of course. I mean, if all you know is suffering because your country can't function because it's being, deprived of all the basics one needs to survive, of course you're going to develop attitudes like this. You'll welcome anything to end the torment. That's the point of these U.S. campaigns, is to make the people suffer enough so that they just give up and they don't care about things like sovereignty anymore because they just want to survive.
Well, this administration is effectively at war. I mean, the United States has been effectively at war with Cuba since 1960, but this administration has escalated it, and there are domestic repercussions, and it's intended to justify repression. The only thing standing in the way is the Bill of Rights and the courts. It's why it relates to my targeting, returning from Iran, which Laura Loomer has essentially taken credit for. She said she called the State Department, she called the FBI, she called the Treasury Department. This is what they want to do.
People in the United States of America proudly flying communist flags and symbolism. Did you forget what it was like under the Red Scare in the late 40s, early 50s? My goodness, they even thought you were a communist sympathizer, you'd be fired from your job. You would be under scrutiny. You couldn't even have any communist ideas. And now it's almost become popular to have these communist ideas. I have to ask you, now people are calling the legacy Democrats, the legacy left. Where are they? Because this is really scary that there is so much popularity. And again, watching these hearings with Brandon Gill when it comes to the Smithsonian, what they are pushing, these ideas are being pushed on our youth and our kids all through college. Are you worried about this? Could this actually seriously take over in this country?
Well, I'm very worried about it.
Of course, it's Randy Fine. He might not actually be wearing his kippah there because it wasn't about Israel. But you're not allowed. You're not allowed. You shouldn't be allowed to have communist ideas. And they're frightened. There definitely is a fear there that there's a backlash because the economic situation, the average American, is declining. No one can afford in the middle class to actually own a home. Home sales are like rich people selling homes to each other at this point. White collar workers are going to have their jobs eradicated by AI. Trump's job program is to build data centers and fuel the AI counter revolution or revolution. He's backed by all of these tech warlords, including Mark Andreessen, who is also was an understudy and student, if you can call him that, of David Horowitz, and his business partner at his venture capital firm is David Horowitz's son, Ben Horowitz. These are the people behind Barry Weiss. They're the ones who are really behind MAGA, and they're all militant Zionists. This is the program. They're afraid of a backlash. They're afraid of Luigi Mangione multiplying, and there'll be Luigi, and then suddenly Mario will crop up. They actually are afraid, or they're fueling that fear among the 1%, and they want to use it to justify a massive crackdown. And the crackdown is expanding into pretty much everyone they named in this report, all across the anti-war left. And a lot of them are people like we know, where we had Medea Benjamin on the show like 2 weeks ago. She's named. They want to take down Code Pink because Code Pink is a gadfly. Code Pink is constantly in their face in Congress, in Randy Fine's face when he calls Muslims dogs and calls for, not just justifying the genocide in Gaza, but celebrating the genocide in Gaza. They're the ones who are there. I always say Medea is one of the few actual reporters on Capitol Hill who's asking real questions of them. So they want to just, they don't want any opposition at all.
Yeah.
So we know those people, and I'm friends with them. I'm allies with a lot of them. I'm not allies with others, but guilt by association. Yeah, I'm guilty of associating with many of those people. So the ring of repression is expanding rapidly, and that's what the purpose of this AI generated paranoid report is. I don't know if there's much to add there, but I expect more this coming week. I expect the repression to increase this week, along with the threat of war in Cuba, as Donald Trump's war on Iran continues to fail. Trump reignited a war on Iran. No one really understood why in the U.S. A new Washington Post Ipsos poll finds only about 20% of the U.S. public thinks the war is worth it. Remember, on February 28th, the war started for really two reasons. Although Trump didn't take much time before that point to justify the war, he just let Netanyahu tell him to launch decapitation strikes. And then he started, working backwards to justify the war to the American public. It's about the Iranian nuclear file. We can't allow these crazy mullahs to have nuclear weapons. They threaten the whole world. He actually said they threaten the United States with a nuclear strike, and they need freedom. And that certainly, that changed into we will destroy Iran's civilization overnight. Trump failed to get the nuclear dust, lost the first phase of the war, basically lost the war within a week when Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, went to a MOU, a ceasefire, so that in J.D. Vance's words, the U.S. could restock. Iran's government signed the MOU, presumably so they could get oil out onto the market and get out from the U.S. siege, and also just demonstrate that they're willing to negotiate, even though they know the U.S. is a perfidious government that will violate the MOU. The U.S. violated it, and then it went back to war earlier this month while I was in Iran, and began striking the southern areas of Iran, Sirik, Keshem, Chabahar, to open up the Strait of Hormuz, to reclaim control of the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before February 28th. So the whole point of the U.S. war now is to get back to the status quo ante that existed before the failed war. And how is the U.S. doing? Well, this was July 18th, following strikes by the U.S. on Iranian military infrastructure, as well as critical infrastructure and civilian infrastructure like bridges. Iran finally started hitting back hard, and they started hitting U.S. bases in Jordan that had not been targeted before, and their missiles have increasing accuracy. This is the Muwafiq Salti Air Base in Jordan, where soldiers were not sufficiently protected. Here's some footage of that. I'm not showing you yet because I didn't put it on screen. Seems bad. Seems pretty bad. This was flown by a U.S. soldier. Those soldiers were not being protected in hardened shelters. And what were they doing there, by the way? What are they doing in Jordan? They're protecting Israel. No U.S. soldier is going into battle to defend the United States and to defend our security. When was the last time soldiers repelled an attack on the United States from the U.S. quote unquote homeland? Hasn't happened in my lifetime. They went to war in Grenada. They went to war in Panama. They went to war in Iraq. Now they're stationed all over this region to defend Israel's strategic depth. and to threaten Iran on behalf of Israel. It's pretty sad. And why are they joining the military?
Well, Trump said that all of them felt very strongly that Iran shouldn't have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
He spoke for the dead soldiers as if he was channeling their souls, and said, yes, that they all told him that they felt strongly that Iran should have a nuclear weapon. So justifying his fake pretext for getting them killed.
This is why, this is what, Isabella Gonzalez and so many Latino and Latina soldiers from Southern Texas are really fighting for. That's why they joined. They didn't join because it's one of the few ways to move up the rungs of the U.S. class structure and maybe finance a college education. It isn't a glorified mercenary army. It's actually, true believers. Just like in the UK, where a new poll shows that 6% of British citizens are willing to fight for the UK in a war against Russia. 6%. Here's some more footage of that strike in Jordan. This is what U.S. soldiers have been left with. Well, this goes on for 3 minutes. Oh God, I just fast forwarded. It doesn't look good. Air raid sirens.
Guys, off the walls if we can. Try to get a TV on.
Anyone watching, who's like turning 18, are you ready to enlist? You want to sign up? Be all you can be. Be a Goyish bullet stopper for Israel. That's your role in Jordan, which is run by a half-British, blue-eyed king who's maintaining a repository warehouse of Palestinians, surplus Palestinians on Israel's behalf, whose intelligence services are basically run by Israel in the U.S., who has no choice whether or not to have these bases. And so several soldiers died in those attacks or died trying to disarm explosives from a downed Iranian drone in Jordan. And here they are, and they clearly look like, ideologically inclined neoconservatives who would fight to denuclearize Iran. Actually, no, they look like the American working class. And guess what happened with them? Angel Rampersad, Isabella Gonzalez, Tyler Feehan, and Michael Emmanuel Swinton. So 2 brown soldiers, 1 black soldier, and a white soldier from the working class were killed while Benjamin Netanyahu's son Yair partied in Miami. And they were removed by the so-called Department of War from the official death toll of 18 American soldiers or service members killed in this war. They were removed by the Trump administration. They don't even count as fallen in this war. That's how proud they are of this. The Trump administration is, and Pete Hegseth is, of this war, by the way, because supposedly the U.S. is in a ceasefire. So they're covering up these deaths that we all know occurred, and they're trying to actually minimize these soldiers' service. I can't even think of a bigger insult.
It's every
ready
day.
To join?
Every day Trump is flashing his contempt for soldiers, for facts, and but yet we haven't seen. People are suffering, but has there been a massive anti-war protest since February? Not really. It's just a weird time. I guess people feel under Trump, it's so demoralized and feels that it doesn't matter because it's basically a quasi-authoritarian government where the popular will just doesn't make any difference whatsoever. So people don't even feel compelled to go out and protest. But the contempt he shows for his own soldiers by placing them in danger, denigrating them, and then now not even counting their sacrifice officially. I mean, it's quite striking.
Well, there will be protests if there are large numbers of Americans killed, as in Iraq. That would take place during a ground assault on something like Chabahar, which would inevitably fail. The Iranian regular military and IRGC is much, much stronger than Iraq's military, which basically folded away into an insurgency and still managed to kill hundreds of American soldiers and wound many more. This would be a disaster politically for Trump, but it's possibly on the horizon as the U.S. attacks border areas between Iraq and Iran. It suggests they could be prepping some kind of ground assault. I mean, I would think it would be in the south around the Strait of Hormuz, but that wouldn't really matter. You know, they could hold Chabahar, but then they would be easy targets for mobile artillery, for drones, for ballistic missiles. There are many ways they could be hammered. FPV drones could enter the picture, the kind we see really hammering Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. It wouldn't be pretty. This would actually play to the strengths of Iran. And, just because they would be physically on the coast of the Strait of Hormuz doesn't mean that Iran couldn't still enforce a blockade. They can still remotely attack ships. They don't need to be on the mountaintops above the strait. None of this makes sense. And then I would think the protests would begin when the Democrats would use their various no kings astroturfed entities to send people into the streets. The whole point of no kings is kind of like to water down more what you could call radical demands and anti-war activity and force all the anti-war forces into this broader mass of like MSNBC boomers. But I mean, during the Iraq War, the protests were not just like all organic. It was move on, and their giant mailing list, email list, and the unions and the Democrats sending people out into the street. So it really would take this broader infrastructure to bring people out to protest the war. But the war is just completely unpopular. It's never going to be more popular. And the military, I mean, the way that Trump has treated the military throughout this conflict, the Joint Chiefs, from the top to the bottom, there isn't much desire to wage this war in the U.S. military. Remember, Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was leaking to the New York Times and Washington Post about coming munitions shortages if Trump attacked Iran, and was basically saying the U.S. is going to lose. So the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was against the war, but he has to follow orders. And then at the bottom of the totem pole, you have these working class soldiers. Where do they come from? I used to substitute teach in LA, or like suburban LA. When I was breaking into journalism, it was a good job to like allow me to pay my rent while I did articles on the side. I was at Alhambra High, east of LA, and other high schools. And like the amount of manipulation of students and pressure on students and enticement that would take place on these high school campuses from military recruiters was insane. They would actually have them come into the classroom, and like all the chum in the class, like I like, if I wore my ID card, the lanyard would say Army. There'd be calendars for the Army. They'd come in the class and say, who wants to come to ROTC? And you basically get to leave class and participate in ROTC. The job recruitment center, it was all military. There were uniformed recruiters walking around the high school trying to just bring people in. It was just nonstop. And this was like a working class public high school. LA County had the highest level, I think, of combat deaths, highest rate of combat deaths per capita in the Iraq War. And they were brown soldiers, Latinos, and many of them were actually being promised citizenship to join. So that's what the U.S. military is. Compare that to, I think, the motivation of an Iranian military and what we saw after Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral, with like 35 million people participating in the funeral. There's no comparison.
Well, you mentioned that the Pentagon brass is not keen on a ground invasion, but the people who Trump's been listening to throughout this whole regime change war, they are. And that includes Mark Thiessen, the former speechwriter for George W. Bush turned Washington Post columnist. And this is what he said.
Which is why I asked. Okay, so we stopped the fighting in the ceasefire on the 20-yard line. We take it into the end zone. We have about 14 days of combat where we have to take out all the targets that we have available. We took out 85% of their defense industrial base. We take out 95% of it. We set back all their programs and we further entomb the nuclear dust. Then we stop major combat operations. We impose the blockade. We open up Cargill. We open up the Strait of Hormuz, and then we go and we help the Iranian people overthrow their regime the same way that the United States. We have muscle memory doing this. We've liberated 400 million people during the Cold War without boots on the ground. So we armed the Mujahideen. We armed UNITA Angola. We helped Solidarity. We helped Charter 77 in Czech Republic. We know how to bring down regimes without boots on the ground. We help the Iranian people. Trump has been tweeting out every day now for the last several days pictures of Iranians being executed by the regime. He's standing with the Iranian people. Let's help them overthrow their regime, weaken it militarily, and then help them do the job and finish it.
I mean, Mark Thiessen talked to Trump and is considered a trusted advisor. So he sounds like a complete clown, but what he's saying should be taken seriously because he has Trump's ear. And I mean, one problem with what he's saying, I mean, put aside like the historical, like he's bragging about arming the Mujahideen, which then led to Al Qaeda. He's bragging about
UNITA.
He's bragging
arming Savimbi, the CIA arming Savimbi in Angola.
Yeah, exactly. He's bragging about siding with South African apartheid in Angola. Forget all that. But like he's advocating things that the U.S. has already tried. They tried all this already. This was the point of the regime change war that Trump launched on February 28th. They've tried all this. It didn't work. And all that's left now is for Trump to accept that Iran's going to control the Strait of Hormuz rather than continue to get U.S. soldiers killed over it. If he just accepted that, he could have an end to this thing and he could walk away and he could pretend that he won. But he's not doing that. And in fact, right now he's ramping up U.S. military assets in the region. So I think we're going to see this weekend, especially after markets close, what Trump is going to do. Is he going to basically return to full-scale war, or is he going to finally take an off-ramp? And if people like Mark Thiessen have their way, it's war.
Mark Thiessen was a former Bush advisor. He is basically a voice for Netanyahu, along with Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro in Trump's ear, and I guess Laura Loomer. And he actually called for the U.S. to murder Iran's entire negotiating team through an act of aerial terrorism by bombing their flight coming back from Pakistan, where they were negotiating with J.D. Vance under the protection of the Pakistani military, which the U.S. supports. He is a subversive plant for Israel in the Trump administration. And this and the effect of continuing this war has actually been the title of this live stream, Debasification, not just entrenchment of Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, devastation of the global economy. And as you said, Aaron, Trump is going to probably escalate this week. Oil has already been driven to $100 a barrel, which means the global economy will suffer unprecedented harm at this point. Time is on Iran's side there. Strategic oil reserves are running out. This is the effect of this war. And the effect of this war is a massive black eye to U.S. empire. The Al Udeid Air Base, which was like one of the main air base for the U.S. in the region in Qatar, has been totally evacuated. New satellite images. This is Will Shriver. This is a good account to follow. New satellite images show that all U.S. aircraft have now been evacuated from the Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. American bases in the Persian Gulf region are no longer tenable. The King Faisal Air Base in Jordan was evacuated. The Muwafaq Salti Air Base, we saw that footage from earlier, has been pretty much evacuated. Barracks at the Ali al-Salam Air Base were just hit by Iran. They're increasingly unable to maintain these very exposed bases under increasingly accurate Iranian ballistic missile and drone fire. And they're moving all their assets into Israel and Jordan, but mainly Israel. And Israel's becoming one of the only assets the U.S. can maintain, but it's not really an asset, it's a liability. And it's Israel guiding this war. Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, saying, we don't want to enter this war at this point. It's going really well for us. We don't need to enter, because the U.S. is fighting this war on their behalf, and the U.S. taxpayer is paying for it to offset the cost to Israel as our militaries merge. And then, meanwhile, Trump is being told by Mark Thiessen to escalate because we had all these great victories during the Cold War. Here's what Ben Shapiro, another guy, I've never met a Ben Shapiro fan. Here's what he's saying.
And upset. It feels like things are stalemated. I get why people are confused.
Listen, guys, I get it. I get you don't like this war, but you have to listen to what I have to say because it's actually, we need more. This is an acceptable loss of Goyim.
And upset. It feels like things are stalemated, that they're getting broader and more difficult. Why? Well, because what the American people want is victory. There's this bizarre notion in foreign policy.
It's bizarre. The American people want to win.
That the American people are deeply worried about the immediate cost of war to the enemy. That the American people, that we can't handle the ugliness of war for even a day. That every conflict has to be totally antiseptic. And here I'm not even talking about the American willingness to undergo casualties. No one in America wants American casualties. It's a tragedy and a horror. We do understand that war does come along with casualties, and we are willing to undergo those casualties in pursuit of an end and a victory for America. But as far as the idea that, for example, America, we can't hit Karga Island because the Iranian people would then be deprived of oil resources. The American people are, I should say, not particularly concerned about that. We're far more concerned with why we're there not winning. I think what we actually ought to do is say an eye for everything. If you touch a ship in the Strait of Hormuz and we kill the head of the IRGC, we kill Khalibaf, we kill your entire leadership class. Again, we destroy South Pars and we destroy Kharg. One drone, and that's what happens.
One drone, and we kill everyone that you could possibly negotiate with who are like reformists.
Well, Trump said something similar this week when he said that, for every ship that's hit instead of Hormuz, we're going to destroy a power plant inside of Iran. So maybe, I'm not sure which came first, Ben Shapiro or Trump, but maybe Trump was listening to Ben Shapiro where he got that new threat from.
They're all saying the same thing. You're right. And they're echoing one another. And these are the neocon Likudnik talking points. Here's the, the Latino Ben Shapiro.
I think I saw, guys, I saw Arachi, their foreign minister, who the other day say something about their policies, an eye for an eye. The president's policy is a head for an eye. I mean, honestly, that's what it's going to be. I mean, they will pay a very heavy price for the things they're doing. They're already paying a very heavy price. You guys don't know because you don't cover it. You're not in Iran. You're not in the street. They don't have a free media. But they're going to continue to pay a very heavy price. Their industrial base has been decimated. Their defense industrial base has been decimated. They're losing launchers. They're losing radars every single night. They are suffering billions of dollars in damage, and their economy is a disaster. But despite all that, these people who are calling us every day, begging, let's do a deal, they send us messages to other countries, third countries, and they're running out of countries to send. Even I had countries here coming up to me, I just spoke to the Iranians, they want to do a deal. The problem is, every time these people do a deal, they either break it or after they make it, they want to change the deal. So they're probably not ready to do a deal yet, but they will be soon because the price they're paying is very high, despite their tough talk and their flowery language and their stupid Lego videos they put out. I've never seen them, but they put these things out on social media.
I feel like he has seen the Lego videos
too. Yeah, including there's a new one about him.
Yeah,
I feel like he's definitely seen them because, or else why would he go out of his way to express such annoyance with them?
And check out my interview with the director of those videos at the Grayzone's YouTube channel. It's pretty interesting. We talk about how they get in the heads of MAGA and top Trump figures. But Rubio's echoing Ben Shapiro, they're calling for a campaign of terrorism to accomplish very murky, dubious military goals, which don't seem achievable. And this is the problem with what Ben Shapiro is calling for, is let's say they hit Karg Island and blow everything up. Although the U.S. is suffering a munitions crisis, Iran can retaliate and can escalate, and it can destroy oil infrastructure across the region, including of countries that are like paying Jared Kushner and his affinity partners billions of dollars. We're talking about Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which are basically Trump partners. They will be destroyed. Kuwait, Bahrain, those countries have, Kuwait is 30% Shia. Bahrain is 40 or 50% Shia. They will be destabilized. Their desalination plants could be destroyed. This will also plunge the global economy into a depression. It will be the, Zionist Ben Shapiro depression. That's what we could call it. People will move into Shapirovilles all across America, in tents on rivers. It's going to be bad. So Iran can do enormous amounts of damage. Just attacking, Iran's oil infrastructure doesn't stop Iran from retaliating. So they don't actually have a plan to win the war. It's just a plan for terror for its own sake. And who would really want that plan? What's the only country that would benefit from that? It's Israel. This is the thing. Like, everyone's trying to figure out what the objective is here and what does victory look like. For Israel, there isn't a clear definition of victory. Opening the Strait of Hormuz for Israel is not necessarily victory if Iran's the Islamic Republic comes into power. For Israel, victory is state destruction and societal destruction of Iran. And I saw that was clear to me when I was there, and I saw the amount of civilian infrastructure that was targeted, including like a major volleyball stadium in Tehran.
That major scientific research school.
Sharif University's AI center.
Yeah.
Like, they need to destroy Iran as an independent country, because they can't allow Iran or any country in the region to be anything but a third world backwater, a desert backwater, that with the starving people and migration flows going to Europe that make Europe more right wing and more, with more pro-Israel governments. That's great for Israel. Israel doesn't get affected by any of that. So they just want to keep the U.S. waging this war for as long as possible. And all of these figures you're hearing, don't even pay attention to what they're saying, or you can pay attention to it, but they want more U.S. soldiers to be killed because it will increase Trump's resolve to continue the war. And they want simply more destruction of Iran. That's all they want. And they're only trying to benefit this tiny little apartheid colony in the Middle East, which is steering the Trump administration's policy through the ghost of Lindsey Graham, who will be honored this Monday in Washington by guess who? I mean, anyone can guess. Benjamin Netanyahu. He's coming back to Washington to give his employee Donald Trump more orders, and he's going to honor Lindsey Graham. So there you have it. 2 weeks ago, guess who was in Washington? We just learned Roman Goffman, who is the new Mossad director. Isn't that strange? Like, he came to Washington and then suddenly the war restarted, like right after he left, and we didn't even know he was here.
And then suddenly Israel started putting out new fake intelligence about they found some new Iranian plot against Trump magically. And they also found, this was in the Wall Street Journal, I think, that Iran was like moving some enriched uranium around. Amazing, like the timing that all this comes and Israel discovers this.
Yes. So and then Netanyahu is going to New York, right? And he's going to be at the UN. He's going to be calling for more war on Iran. That's where he's going to make his case as Israel attempts to destroy the UN, the ICC, which we'll talk about in a second. And for the first time, we have a New York City mayor who isn't attempting to arrest a Palestinian figure, as we saw Rudy Giuliani have Yasser Arafat arrested at a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony after Arafat won the Nobel Peace Prize and basically gave away the store with the Oslo Accords in 1995. We have a mayor in New York who's calling to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu according to the ICC warrant.
Max, if you could try to do something with your mic, because it's a little muffled.
It's muffled?
Yeah.
Can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. It might be because I have like a chaotic sonic environment around me caused by some younger members of the Blumenthal family. I don't know, but this is supposed to be a dynamic mic. my studio is a little bit more exposed than it used to be. Anyway, so Mamdani, I don't know if we need to play this whole address, but basically this is it. He called for Netanyahu to be arrested by those who have the authority to do so. Federal officials, there are no federal officials willing to do it. His NYPD chief, Jessica Tisch, is basically a Zionist ideologue from a very pro-Zionist family. So she's not going to do it. But he is, he's sitting before an American flag and a New York municipal flag, using his authority at Gracie Mansion to call for the arrest of a foreign official, according to the ICC, if he comes to New York. I feel like it's shaping the political environment going forward for other officials to do this and to reap political benefits. This has been retweeted like 500,000 times. Millions and millions have shared this. Mamdani is benefiting from this display of from his desire to enforce international law against the Israeli prime minister. And then, there are others who think he should do more. And, we can get into that, but what are your thoughts?
I think what he's doing is extraordinary. And I just don't look, everybody operates within constraints, including the mayor of New York City. And the fact that New York City is coming out and calling for the arrest of Netanyahu, and legally, I think he's right. I don't think he can, because of the immunity that a foreign leader gets when they come to New York for the General Assembly. I believe that legal rationale, but he's using this platform, I think, in the most effective way he can, which is to speak the truth, and that's to call Netanyahu a war criminal. And I think it's excellent. And I just don't, if people have criticisms of that, well, I just don't know what more you want from the guy. And look, the fact that he's even in that position, it's not easy to be mayor of New York City, and he achieved that. And I think now he's using his platform for a really noble effort. So I don't look, I haven't seen much of the criticism, but I just don't know what more they want Mamdani to do.
I don't know what else he can do to arrest Netanyahu, and he has encouraged protests. He could, one question is, could he prevent the NYPD from protecting Netanyahu to make it more difficult for Netanyahu to come to New York City? That's a question. Okay,
but one thing I think, at least I would think about if I were Mamdani, if I were a public figure, is that, if you really push things to the limit, you'll get killed. Look at Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Dr. King. So maybe some people at that public level make a choice to operate at a certain level of speaking the truth, but maybe not going as far as they could. And I can't fault someone if they're thinking about trying to stay alive for not going as far as they possibly can and still operating within certain constraints, maybe because they want to live. I think that's probably a factor.
I don't know if that's a factor. I don't think that's affecting his calculus on whether or not, he should take certain acts to arrest Netanyahu.
Well, I'm saying
they already want to kill him.
Well, I'm saying is if I was at that level, in light of what's happened throughout history, in light of what happened to Malcolm X and Dr. King and Fred Hampton, I don't know. That's something that would probably cross my mind.
Well, he's not a private citizen. He has protection. I don't know if that's a factor. I don't know what. I think if the power was there, it might have been executed. And everyone who is thinking of entering public life, who's watching this, who is campaigning for office, are you afraid? Are you going to be a step back from taking on Israel because you're afraid of assassination? Well, there's a candidate in New Hampshire who's running for Congress named Howard Heath. I think he's running as a Republican. He's a libertarian. And he received a letter from the same figure who sent, or figures who sent me a death threat, which arrived in my mailbox, signed "Your Dead Meat," YOORDEDMEET, telling me that I'm on a list and that I'm fucked. Signed the committee. He got the same letter. Many other figures have been getting these letters. And some of them are just like, and I've been in touch with them. Some of them are just like academics who challenged pro-Israel repression on campus and got called out by Zionist media groups or Zionist institutions and accused of anti-Semitism. And then suddenly these letters show up. So it's like, what can you do to avoid being threatened by these psychopaths affiliated with the Jewish Defense League, who are basically terrorists waiting in the wings in our country, who are being activated by more mainstream Zionist institutions? You either have to basically just retreat or go into battle, go into political battle. And I mean, here you have a candidate who's endorsed by Track APAC, Howard Heath, and he's getting these death threats. I assume other candidates are. I'm sure Ilhan Omar gets many death threats. The return address on the envelope was Rashida Tlaib's field office. Rashida Tlaib has reported these letters to the Capitol Police. So, and I got the letter, and I'm being targeted too. So what am I gonna do? Mamdani is like probably their biggest target right now. We published a film which was an inside kind of hidden camera. It wasn't a hidden camera, but we published a film by a filmmaker who joined Beitar openly as a Jew. Beitar being a group that has now been closed by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, because of their support for Jewish terrorism. And he got more access to them than any other filmmaker, anyone that I've seen, and got them on camera. Their leader, Ron Tarosian, and like his lieutenant, joking about planting a bomb in Mamdani's car. That's in the film. So yeah, I agree, Aaron. Like the more Israel's challenged at the higher levels, the more they're going to resort to the kind of tactics that they've employed in the region, where they kill journalists, they turn pagers into weapons. But is that going to stop people from enforcing international law and like following their convictions? It should not. And well, I don't want people to be intimidated.
Well, sure, and it hasn't stopped Mamdani. I was just trying to, imagine what it'd be like to be in his shoes, and I just don't understand people. I mean, to accomplish what Mamdani's already done, it's pretty extraordinary, and I just don't see how it's productive to try to tear him down when he's doing a good job as mayor, and he's calling out Netanyahu as a war criminal. He's saying things that no one else would say. He's setting an example. He's setting the bar for the rest of the Democratic Party to follow. So, look, I just don't see what's productive about tearing down Mamdani when I think he's doing something pretty heroic.
Well, I think if a Jewish terrorist or Jewish fanatic were to carry out a crime like that, or a King David hotel bombing in this country, I don't think they'd recover. I don't know how they would recover from that. And they're already in a major PR crisis, as they're acknowledging. For some reason, they really think that Ynet has some piece identifying me as like a top PR threat to Israel, and says, it's how anti-Semitic influencers turned hate into a multi-million-dollar industry. Yeah, if only I was a multi-millionaire. Great illustration there. And they say, they're calling me Blumenthal Jr. Like my dad, Max Blumenthal.
Yeah, so because you have a father, you're now a junior? Okay, yeah. That's
right. I had a politically influential father, I guess that's what they're trying to say. I compare Israel to apartheid-era South Africa and the American South under racist Jim Crow laws. Now, that was the old me before October 7th. Israel is something much worse now.
Yeah, I mean, that's way too kind to Jim Crow.
We're dedicated to any U.S. military intervention around the world. All right, well, so are most Americans at this point. And we claim that Israeli society is steeped in racist and fascist culture, while its leaders use the memory of the Holocaust to justify violence against Palestinians. Oh my God. Did I actually say that? That's conspiracy thinking. What else did I say that's crazy? After October 7th, Blumenthal claimed that Israel deliberately fabricated and exaggerated reports of Hamas's atrocities in order to, quote, gain legitimacy for genocide. Whoa. I'm really sorry, guys, I went that far. I mean, 40 beheaded babies, that was real. He argues that Zionism is a form of cult that both feeds on and requires anti-Semitism in order to survive politically and financially. Yeah, that doesn't make sense at all. Last month, after a devastating earthquake in Venezuela, he posted that Israel was, quote, infiltrating Venezuela under the guise of a humanitarian aid delegation. What am I, crazy? They just were there to help. I mean, they were just there to help a country that had removed the Israeli embassy and ended all ties with Israel in 2009. They weren't trying to infiltrate.
I mean, I really wish that weren't true. But those photos of Delcy Rodriguez greeting Israeli officials, it's one of the most depressing sights I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I guess I was onto something there. We're going to talk about that in a second. But Israel is facing an unprecedented public relations crisis. It's never coming back. The American public is never going to support Israel again. The Europeans are going. No one in the world except for elites and those who are ideologically Zionist and live in like this hermetic world of Christian Zionism or Jewish Zionism support it. It's nobody else. It's over. And some Fox boomers who like seeing Muslims getting blown up. That's it. They're going to die. So what will Israel do? It has no way out of this except to bomb its way out and to criminalize us and to try to de-educate the American public. I saw Ben Shapiro and Batya Ungar Sargon, whoever she is, or whatever her name is. They're constantly praising the less educated voters who vote Republican and earn less money. And like, I think that's what they want most Americans to be, is to be like cattle so that they won't have the awareness to actually challenge the special relationship. There's nothing else Israel can do. And yeah, assassination, it hasn't worked in the region. It's not going to work here. It's going to backfire. Aaron, you brought up the sad scenes of Israeli military in Venezuela. I guess we could like introduce the next segment by talking about this, and then I want to hear what happened at the OPCW, because I think this relates to what I want to talk. That relates to what I want to talk about in this, I guess, last segment. This is a post I just titled "Hostages." Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores, his kidnapped wife, the abducted legitimate president of Venezuela, had a day in court. I think that's Barry Pollock, their lawyer. They're hostages of the U.S. regime. They were kidnapped. Their guards were murdered right in front of them. And they may have been sold out. I don't know. Something strange is going on in Venezuela. They've just allowed Israel to waltz right in. This is on the official Instagram account of Delcy Rodriguez meeting with Israeli military officials and intelligence officials. This is pretty sad. They're there to supposedly help after this earthquake, which has killed thousands, especially in just outside Caracas. And I say, she's a hostage too. Delcy Rodriguez had a secret indictment, which I revealed at the Grayzone for her arrest. And the Trump administration is now removing that secret warrant because she's doing everything they seem to want. And this is one of the major things that they want, is they want Venezuela to be part of the Isaac Accords, which is the Abraham Accords for Latin America, which gives Israel total control over Latin American economies, intelligence sharing, military sharing, and economic exploitation of mineral wealth and oil wealth. And there it is. This is it. Hugo Chavez kicked out the Israeli ambassador in 2009 when Israel started bombarding the Gaza Strip during Operation Cast Lead. The first time I ever saw Delcy Rodriguez in public, and I've interviewed her, I've met I met her on several occasions. The first time I ever saw her in public, she was speaking before the People's Assembly in Caracas wearing a kufiya. She was wearing a kufiya to try to demonstrate her solidarity for Palestine. Well, that solidarity was certainly fungible, as were any revolutionary principles that Hugo Chavez preached, because this is it. Again, I said, before, I'm not going to defend her. There's nothing to defend there. It doesn't mean I'm going to just kind of maliciously attack her because she is a hostage. But they were invaded. And then this is what happened today. Background was our last segment. Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York, called to arrest the prime minister of Israel, according to an ICC warrant. And I would assume if Vladimir Putin were to go to New York, Mamdani would say he should be arrested as well, just to be considered.
He did say that, and he said that he would, yeah.
He did say that.
Yeah.
The ICC warrant for Netanyahu is for genocide. He was conducting mass killing and ethnic cleansing, and is attempting to continuing to seek to ethnically cleanse and destroy the Gaza Strip. The warrant for Putin was for relocating thousands of ethnically Russian minors to the Russian Federation in the middle of a war, to moving them out of a war zone. And they were supposedly like kidnapped and disappeared, except no one's we kind of know where they are. Anyway, Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, who introduced both warrants for Putin and Netanyahu's former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, he's now cooked. There was sexual harassment allegations suddenly conjured up or introduced against him after he introduced that warrant for Netanyahu. And now a majority of nations has voted that he must leave. And Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch has posted over 80 times on Twitter X calling for Khan to step down.
Of course. Ken Roth, who campaigns for regime change everywhere, including in places like Venezuela.
Yeah.
Not surprised at all that he was an open cheerleader for getting rid of the chief prosecutor of the ICC, who was holding Netanyahu accountable.
And regime change Roth. Yes.
So
wait, and then the final ingredient here, and this is all this week. Okay. Karim Khan's accuser suddenly appears and materializes on Christiane Amanpour, one of the biggest military interventionists in liberal media. Ken Roth calling for him to step down, and Marco Rubio at the State Department is calling for sanctions on the ICC for this warrant against Netanyahu, and just says we have to end the ICC. It's an official call from the US government to end the ICC. So what happened today? This is the saddest thing yet. Felix Plasencia Gonzalez, who I guess he's the new foreign minister at Venezuela, declares that Venezuela is leaving the ICC right after Israel infiltrates Venezuela. Its firm and irrevocable decision to denounce the Rome Statute and initiate its definitive withdrawal from the ICC in accordance with Article 127. And it's doing it in the most disgusting, cynical, and phony way by claiming that the ICC is biased against leaders from the global South. As if, the timing, we're not going to notice the timing. We're not going to notice that like the US is trying to destroy the ICC and Israel is trying to destroy the ICC because they actually indicted a white man who is the leading Jewish supremacist in the world, genocidaire Benjamin Netanyahu. That has nothing to do with this. They just suddenly up and decided that, hey, the ICC is biased. They weren't going to do that, though, when Nicolas Maduro was foreign minister under Hugo Chavez, when they were trying to enforce international law and invoke international law and invoke the Vienna Conventions when their embassies were being invaded and taken over by Juan Guaido's forces. No, they just decided it was. I want one Venezuelan official to tell me to my face that this is the real reason why they're doing this, and it wasn't because this was the quid pro quo or the demand by Israel.
It's just so sad. A country under Chavez and Maduro was like, a leading supporter of international solidarity, international law, and years of U.S. sanctions culminating in this kidnapping of Maduro, and it all gets slowly wiped away. And, you know, for all the people on the left who spent their time like bashing Maduro for whatever reason, whatever whatever issues they had with him, it's like, I hope all this forces a reevaluation of how you want to spend your time. Like, you know, when you're in a country that is strangling global South countries like Venezuela, to bring about exactly outcomes like this, where they become hostages, is it the best use of your time to find issues about the targeted global South country that you disagree with or think could be done differently? And because all that time that was spent like nitpicking, and we're seeing this now ongoing with Nicaragua too, like nitpick about certain things, it's like it distracts from the fact that your own government is terrorizing this global South country and setting the stage for exactly what's being done now, which is basically turning Venezuela into a colony, into a complete hostage, and now forced to do things like this. It's just it's very deflating.
This is, you know, we were attacked for defending Venezuela against the coup that began in Trump's first term. There were attacks on Maduro from Jacobin, from the Nation, that whole part of the left, which wouldn't do so now.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were many things about the Bolivarian Revolution I found inspiring and would have liked to have brought to my country before as being sanctioned into 3 Great Depressions. They reduced extreme poverty by over 50%, literacy programs, cooperatives, all kinds of great things. But I was just trying to prevent this from happening because the implications go well beyond Venezuela. And now the country that sits on the largest oil reserves is being controlled by the Zagosphere. And it's going to be used for the most malign, diabolical interests. And its oil is being stolen. Only $300 million of oil revenue has gone back to Venezuela. Where is the oil? It's just being stolen. The ICC's, Venezuela is now being used to destroy the ICC. It's like the tip of the spear from the global South, still technically ruled by a former minister in Chavez's and Maduro's government. The tip of the spear against the ICC, which finally has a warrant for Netanyahu. So that's what I was trying to prevent. That's why I spoke in front of Miraflores Palace against regime change and declared regime change begins at home on Venezuelan national TV. That's why I interviewed Maduro and gave him the time of day and let him speak. And now you see the consequences.
Yeah, and you were very alone in that quest. It's just like, you know, unfortunately, progressive politics operates so much like a schoolyard where like some issues just are deemed to have cooties, and Venezuela's sovereignty was one of them. Remember when you asked AOC, like, hey, like, what do you think about Trump launching a coup attempt in Venezuela? And she said to you, I'm going to defer to, well, actually, she said we're going into a meeting. But what she told the public was she said,
we'll have a statement later. And she ran away. She really ran. She was wearing stiletto heels, but she ran.
She deferred to Nancy Pelosi. And what did Nancy Pelosi do? She gave it a standing ovation. Literally, when Trump brought Juan Guaido into a State of the Union address, Nancy Pelosi gave Juan Guaido, this fake president who Trump tried to install, a standing ovation. So that was a huge, to be charitable, blunder by Democrats to basically just accede to Trump's coup attempt. And now we're looking at the result. And yeah, as you mentioned, the Financial Times recently reported that Trump has collected $13 billion in Venezuela's oil revenue, and no one knows where it is. No one knows where it is. And Trump's bragging about how we've taken it. And it's just like, yeah, it's just straight up piracy. And everyone,
they're using 2 companies. And I reported this, and actually the Washington Post first reported it, but you know, I highlighted it in my piece that I broke about Mauricio Claver-Corón, who's running Venezuela, this corrupt mentor of Marco Rubio, who isn't even in government. He calls himself the Jared Kushner of Venezuela, which is these 2 companies that are 2 of the most corrupt trading companies on the planet, Trafigura and Vitol, are responsible for shipping the oil out. And the Department of Justice got rid of its corrupt foreign practices division in order to protect companies like that, because they were rung up for hundreds of millions of dollars of fines under Biden. we don't know where the money's going. It's just straight up piracy. It's straight up theft. It's like when the U.S. Marines marched into Port-au-Prince in Haiti and just stole all the gold for the boys at Citibank. And Nicaragua's also, next on the target board. Democracy Now! Falsely claimed that President Daniel Ortega called for ending elections. And no, I've been reporting since the coup in Nicaragua, the failed coup attempt that left hundreds dead, in which like scores of cops were murdered by opposition hooligans, that the United States was funding pretty much the whole thing through various NGOs, US-backed political parties, US networks that were inspiring and calling for people to go out and riot and kill and burn, like 100% Noticias was funded by the US government. Ortega is basically saying no US government funded candidates. Would the United States allow Russian and Chinese funded candidates to run in its elections? No. And so Nicaragua is now going to be sanctioned more and more for that. It will actually have elections. But look at every other Latin American country in the last year. Every other Latin American country in the last year has had its elections rigged by the United States, by the Trump administration. Honduras, rigged. Bolivia, rigged. Argentina's parliamentary elections, rigged with threats of pulling an IMF loan. They are just rigging everything. So if Nicaragua experiences regime change, you got 3 to 5 million Sandinistas, or probably 3 million Sandinistas, one of the biggest workers' movements in the Western Hemisphere. It's a huge threat to U.S. empire. And there'll just have to be a purge. And there will never be an election again that will have sovereign Nicaraguan candidates be allowed to run. It's actually the U.S. that wants to eliminate fair elections in Nicaragua, as they've done in Honduras, where it's going to be impossible for any opposition to the corrupt, narco-tied National Party to run, as they've done in El Salvador, where they have a Trump-tied crypto dictator, Nayib Bukele. I mean, he's fairly popular there. He's not allowing any opposition. He had troops march into parliament to shut it down and declare emergency law. That's what the U.S. wants. So don't believe the hype.
Well, since you mentioned it, I think we should play the clip from Democracy Now! Because this speaks to how just powerful our propaganda system is, that even a progressive show is repeating essentially a State Department lie about Nicaragua.
When the government fired on massive peaceful protests and killed some 50 people. In the last elections in 2021, virtually all of the candidates were arrested and have since been exiled and stripped of their citizenship. All independent media and NGOs have been shut down and exiled. There are no independent political parties. Last year, the Constitution was amended to formally do away with the separation of powers and put all power in the hands of the two co-presidents, Daniel Ortega and his wife, Rosario Murillo. So this really, it's just dropping the other shoe. It's just making, just ending all the pretense that there are any rights in Nicaragua, that there's any possibility of a fair election. And this is really, as you know, Amy, I go back in Nicaragua for 40 years and to the time of the revolution. Daniel Ortega, who was part of a group that rose up to fight off a family dictatorship, has now created a family dictatorship. And it's a real tragedy for the people of Nicaragua.
And this is in the context that, so like the question is, so Deanna is saying, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega says his country will no longer hold election, further entrenching the one-time revolutionaries' authoritarian rule. And again, as Max talked about, he didn't say they're not going to hold elections anymore. He said they're going to ban U.S. finance candidates, that there won't be elections anymore with U.S. finance candidates, which is like, if you want to criticize that, like, okay, if you, in the context of like decades of U.S. terrorism of the country, if you have a problem with Nicaragua cracking down on U.S. backed candidates, all right. But like, that's very different than saying they're not going to have elections anymore.
Well, Reed Brody works for Ken Roth. I mean, he is like a Soros operative. And Soros is an anti-communist billionaire who wants capitalism and wants many of the same things that Trump wants. No one wants to. I mean, that would shock a lot of Republicans. But Human Rights Watch has been campaigning for. They campaigned for regime change against Bolivia's elected government under Evo Morales. Ken Roth celebrated the coup, the anti-democratic right-wing murderous coup, in which dozens of indigenous protesters were murdered in Sencata. You didn't hear Reed Brody complaining about that. You saw Ken Roth celebrating it. This guy, and he said 50 people were just shot in a peaceful protest. He's just making that up out of whole cloth. It's completely made up. But basically, Nicaragua has a choice now under the Don Roe doctrine. Allow all these U.S.-backed candidates like Felix Maradiaga. He's like one of the main opposition leaders who's now touring the U.S., campaigning for regime change. His whole career has been sponsored by the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID. And allow La Prensa, which was created with millions of dollars of money from USAID and the Chamorro family, allow them to just run free. And Miguel Mora from 100% Noticias, which was like openly calling for people. Mora, in an interview with me, openly called for the U.S. military to kidnap Daniel Ortega and his wife, and has aired calls to murder masses of Sandinistas. Like, allow them to run free. I'll have an election. Allow the U.S. to threaten your country. Allow the U.S. to fund them, run ads against you, run AI ads, just completely meddle and destroy your country, or do what they have just done, which is to ban all that. And it's not a good option. But those are the choices they face, because every single election that Reed Brody and Ken Roth and Christiane Amanpour and Amy Goodman would support in Latin America will be rigged by Donald Trump and Marco Rubio in support of the most fascistic, right-wing Christian Zionist governments who are controlled by crypto scammers imaginable.
And this is a similar crowd that freaked out over mythical Russian interference, where Russia was accused of putting out some social media memes and stealing some emails. And that triggered a years-long national freakout and talking, defense of our sovereignty. And this is like as bad as Pearl Harbor. So you compare, and it wasn't even true, but you compare the freakout over that to like what is then seen as normal in foreign countries, which is financing candidates, financing riots, financing opposition media that like helps destabilize the country. And it's sad that even among progressive media there's a blind spot when it comes to chauvinism. Like it speaks to how good our propaganda system is, that it enlists people in things that they oppose elsewhere, but just not consistently.
The left in the U.S., like the Amy Goodman Nation magazine left, it doesn't have an analysis that it goes beyond sort of like anarcho-liberalism, and they just think all governments are bad, so we just have to support the people against the government no matter what. And then they get duped into supporting people who are US-backed color revolutionaries. That's Amy Goodman's like Achilles heel, along with her love for Beyonce. And she was on that State Department Cuba list, like the blacklist that Marco Rubio put out. Sorry, you're not going to get out from under the blacklist by supporting the same thing that Marco Rubio supports. It's not going to happen. They see that as a form of weakness, actually. But I think all of this discussion, this whole discussion about the ICC, which is just being destroyed because it was set up to be a tool of the global North, what you could call like the Anglo West against the global South, to put on trial, brown and black tin pot dictators and let genocidal Western leaders and genocidal Israeli leaders off the hook, has now kind of broken the cardinal rule and indicted Benjamin Netanyahu. It's all exposed. The UN has been exposed throughout the Gaza genocide. We can see the FIFA was just exposed massively as another US rigged, supposedly multilateral body. The Olympics, I mean, it's all like Russians can't have flags, but Israelis can when they compete. Come on. It's all fake. We see what it is. And the OPCW has been exposed by you pretty much almost single-handedly as one of those same institutions over the Duma deception when in April 2018, jihadist mercenaries backed by Saudi Arabia and Qatar staged a false flag event to falsely implicate the Syrian government in a chlorine attack in order to trigger US, British, and French bombing of Syria, which was like a key moment in the drive to regime change and towards the final stages of the dirty war on Syria. And you've exposed how that was done, how the OPCW rigged the report, basically cooked the report. The inspectors who wrote the initial report are now out in the open, and you have a new piece about the OPCW, which further vindicates what you've written about Duma.
Yeah, well, there's been some developments recently. So just to catch people up, the key inspector who challenged the Duma cover-up, Brendan Whelan, he challenged the OPCW for basically smearing him at the International Labor Organization, which is like the body adjudicating these matters, because he worked for the OPCW. And he won his case, and the OPCW was ordered to pay damages. And over the course of that case, the OPCW, in trying to defend their attacks on Dr. Whelan, they admitted that they concealed a key piece of evidence, that was the toxicology finding, which ruled out chlorine gas as the cause of death in Duma. And chlorine gas is what the US, France, and UK claimed was used, and that's what they bombed Syria over, this alleged chlorine gas attack. And these toxicologists the OPCW consulted said that chlorine gas could not have been the weapon. So the OPCW covered that up, and in the course of their case against Dr. Whelan, the OPCW inadvertently admitted that. They said that Dr. Whelan shared what they called highly protected information, and that's a euphemism for censored. They censored this. So that was admitted. And recently, Brazil actually brought this up at the OPCW. There was a recent meeting of the Executive Council, and Brazil said that the admission that the OPCW concealed what they called highly protected evidence calls into question the legitimacy of the Duma investigation. So that's Brazil putting this forward. And so many of the people of our detractors who tried to silence us over this, they constantly accuse us of spreading Russian disinformation. Well, now they have to accuse us of spreading Brazilian disinformation. So it's or Brazilian and Russian disinformation, because now Brazil is at the forefront of challenging this. But meanwhile, what also happened was the OPCW recently essentially rewarded Syria for a job well done, which was regime change, because the allegation that the former government used chemical weapons, that was integral to the regime change campaign and justifying airstrikes, arming insurgents, sanctions. What was the constant refrain? Assad gassed his own people. Assad gassed his own people. So therefore, we had to destroy the country with the regime change war. And now that the regime change war succeeded, in part because of the pervasiveness of the chemical weapons allegations, now Syria's been rewarded. And the OPCW recently restored Syria's voting status at the OPCW because it's a job well done. Regime change was accomplished. So now Syria gets welcomed back into the fold. And Trump did a similar thing where at the NATO summit in Turkey, he announced that he was taking Syria off of the list of groups that sponsor terrorism, which Syria has been on since the late 70s. And why did Trump do this? Is because now Syria is playing ball. Syria has cut off the arms pipeline between Iran and Hezbollah that went through Syria. And so now they get rewarded. So even though they're led by a former al-Qaeda offshoot, Mohammed al-Jalani, aka Ahmed al-Shar, is the founding leader of al-Qaeda in Syria, a former deputy leader of ISIS. Now they get taken off the terror list. And actually, Lindsey Graham, shortly before he passed away, he explained why they deserve this. This is what he wrote. President al-Shar has been a true thorn in the side of Iran. He has dramatically reduced Iran's influence in Syria, which is a giant step forward for the Syrian people and a blow to Iran. It is time to recognize what he's done regarding Iran and give him the capability to improve the lives of the Syrian people. So implicit in that is an acknowledgement of why the regime change war was launched. It was to weaken and destabilize a key ally of Iran, and in the process to deny the Syrian people the right to live. Because if now you're saying that because the Syrian people deserve a chance to have their lives improved because their government is no longer an ally of Iran, you're saying it was okay to torment them and torture them so long as they were previously an ally of Iran. So Lindsey Graham is admitting that he was willing to torture the Syrian people just to get rid of an ally of Iran. And now that the government's playing ball, as he says, they're a true thorn on the side of Iran. Now they get to be taken off the terror list. And like, I think it's a good thing Syria is being taken off the terror list because the Syrian people don't deserve to be punished for anything. The point is they never should have been on there in the first place. And things like the terror list are just completely political tools to wage hegemonic wars, as was the case in Syria. And so now that the job has been done, regime change, Syria's playing ball, now they get to come back into the fold, so they get their voting rights restored at the OPCW. And a country led by the founding leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria is now no longer considered a state sponsor of terror.
Yeah, when Syria was cooperating with the U.S. after 9/11 on rendering Al-Qaeda suspects because there was a mutual enemy, they weren't taken off the list. They're only taken off the list after Al-Qaeda takes over in order to help Israel.
Yeah, well, that wasn't enough. I mean, back when Assad was cooperating with extraordinary rendition, he was still refusing to cooperate with cracking down on Hezbollah and Palestinian groups. There's even State Department documents about this where they say that, yes, Syria has provided beneficial cooperation. Syria even warned the U.S. about Al-Qaeda going into Iraq from Syrian territory. So, but that wasn't enough because Syria was refusing to do the same against Hezbollah and Palestinian resistance groups. And so therefore, they had to be marked for regime change. And now that regime change has succeeded, now they get welcomed back into the fold.
Yeah. It's like what is terrorism? Like this just exposes what a political, phony, subjective definition of terrorism the U.S. and whole West operates under. How this whole field of terrorism studies and all the fake terror academics and terror experts, they're not actually interested in combating terrorism. They're mostly just interested in combating the non-state groups that aren't willing to be cowed by Israel. I mean, the founder of the Treasury Department's Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Division, who was Undersecretary of Treasury under George W. Bush, he created that whole division to take on terrorism and defund the terrorists. He used Al-Qaeda as justification and then wound up focusing entirely on Iran, Hezbollah. I'm talking about Stuart Levy, who was actually...
I was going to say, don't tell me he's Jewish.
Unfortunately, he is, and he was a student of Marty Peretz from New Republic when Marty was at Harvard. So it's like that was like his thesis advisor. So it's kind of like this whole idea of terrorism was cooked up, like the whole concept of it and definition was cooked up by Zionists like Benjamin Netanyahu through the Jonathan Institute, starting in 1979, coming to Washington and 1989, coming to Washington and starting to have these off-the-record meetings with influencers and journalists and politicians about what terrorism is. And it's just basically Arabs and Muslims who fight Israel. That's terrorism. Arabs and Muslims who are terrorists who support Israel or are CIA assets, that's not terrorism. That's, I don't know. That's, preparation to lead Syria.
Yeah.
By the way, where are all our detractors these days? Like,
on the issue of Syria?
Yeah, one of them just wrote an intro for a Nir Rosen article at Drop Site, so that was kind of funny to watch.
It's just amazing, like there's something. It's okay to admit, like, if you get something wrong, like it happens, and I think it's the honorable thing to do. If you get something really wrong, if you cheerlead for years for a Al-Qaeda dominated insurgency, which then helps pave the way for the U.S. to then take the aggression even for the U.S. and Israel to take the aggression even further into South Lebanon and
Iran,
as Zionist groups openly brag about. Like there's a group called the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. I think they recently published an article saying that with Assad gone, it's so much easier for the U.S. and Israel to take the war to Iran. They're bragging about this. So when you're involved in a project where Zionist groups are openly cheerleading and saying that like this regime change in Syria has made it easier for us to expand our aggression, you think maybe, and now the insurgency you said was like, you know, a bunch of moderates and democracy lovers is led by the founding leader of Al Qaeda. I mean, I think the obvious thing to do would be just to admit you're wrong and to maybe say, I'm sorry for spending so much energy attacking all those people like you, Max, who are against this. But that hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I believed all of the. I believed all the Trotskyists and the Rabin Yassin Kassab and all the Trotskyist Verso reading groups that told me that the local coordination committees were going to take over Syria and that woke anarchists with blue hair and gauge earrings were going to lead in Damascus and it was a people's revolution. I'm sorry I believed that. Just, you could say that, but it's whatever, you know. It's nice to see Anna Kasparian out there saying the U.S. funded Al Qaeda and armed it. Like, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one rare case actually where she's taken some accountability for that. But it hasn't. I mean, I saw recently, like when you were speaking at Busboys and Poets, there's at least one prominent person trying to get that canceled because
they tried to shut my talk. The Syria regime changers who already got regime change and got everything they wanted and got Jolani in Damascus. They're still trying to shut down my talks because of my views on Syria. This one complete tool of U.S. empire, Maya El Saldani, her name is. She's Egyptian, I guess, and she runs some bogus Gulf-sponsored think tank called the Tahrir Institute, but she's also on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy. So she's basically a U.S. government asset. She was petitioning busboys to shut down my talk, like an anti-war cafe to shut down my talk because I got Syria right and you got Syria right.
I mean, it happened to me and Roger Waters a few years ago. We were doing a Palestine charity event in London, and a group of people signed a petition trying to urge the organizers to cancel us. And the people behind this petition were part of a group that literally works with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, like a Zionist organization. So people who openly collaborate with a pro-Israel lobby group are trying to tell Palestinians who they can host for a charity event. I mean, it's crazy. And I faced this. I won this award from CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, a Gaza Solidarity Award. And there are people who tried to get that taken away from me because of my views on Syria. So it's amazing that anyway, it just.
If I got an award from CARE, it would be like, those Vietnam vets throwing their medals over the White House gate. I'd be like throwing that away right now. But anyway, I'm sure you deserved it.
Well, I like to, anyway, it's just, whatever people's like, let's take the most charitable like interpretation. People have grievances for whatever reason. They've suffered under Assad. Okay, but if you think that justifies destroying a country, sanctions, arming an Al Qaeda led insurgency, all those refugees, all that suffering, I just don't know what to tell you. And certainly, I don't think you have the right to cancel people who disagree with you because they didn't want to see what happened in Syria, and they didn't want to see Israel and the U.S. empowered to then move on to destroying southern Lebanon and trying to destroy Iran.
Agreed. Speaking of events and all that, some people were asking, is there going to be Icarus Fest or like a Grayzone Day? I don't know. We did have a super chat asking about that, so I just wanted to respond that there's nothing planned. It was a great event last year that we had in Rutherford, New Jersey. A lot of people came, and I want to bring people back together while the weather's nice. But there were also it was just organizationally very difficult to do. So I'm looking into something like that. But there will be opportunities to get everyone together in the future this year. Hopefully, the Busboys event was great. As I said before, it was a packed house, and so I really appreciate all of you who came out, and appreciate everyone watching today, and for liking this stream, subscribing to us on Substack, subscribe to Aaron on Substack. You can support us on Patreon or however you see fit. And next week is going to be a crazy week, and not necessarily in a good way. So it's important to keep your head in this time. Not be intimidated. We'll be back. We'll be back then. Yeah, hopefully I'll be back. It's always good to meet on Friday and wrap everything up. Hopefully I'll be back and not in like Marco Rubio internment camp, but we'll see. I have a hard stop now. Anything you want to add, Aaron? Your book. Let's get your book on screen again.
My book, Their Blood, Our Bullets, The Hidden Story of the Ukraine Proxy War, available for pre-order now. There's a link to that in the show notes of this episode. And yeah, I'm excited for people to read it. It comes out this fall.
Their Blood, Our Bullets. Yeah, you can. I would get it from Or Books on their website to avoid supporting Amazon. But you know, if you want to boost Aaron's Amazon ratings on the Ukraine category,
no, please don't. Please, if you're going to get it from More Books, yes.
Get him ahead of Timothy Snyder or whoever. All right. Well, anyway, thanks a lot, Aaron. Great work as always, and see you all next week. Peace.
Peace.